Welcome to the false equivalency of propaganda to narrative fiction and fiction affects reality debate. This is presented by Rainy Studios, aka Sam Aburime. And little introduction to Sam. Outside of being a full-time artist, Sam is an independent scholar of fan studies with a focus on combating disinformation in online communities by prioritizing academic resources and professional perspectives. Their site, fujoshi.info, houses over 520 resources related to BL, censorship, media literacy, psychology, LGBTQIA+ topics, and women's issues. All right, I will turn it over to Sam now.
Hey everybody, I hope you're having a good day today. It's like I had a good Juneteenth and I hope you guys did too. I had my cookout and everything. And I've been looking forward to talking to everybody about this topic today and the issues that come with it and how we can deal with that. So I see a few people are still coming in, so I'll just wait just 1 second. All right, so the false equivalency of propaganda to narrative fiction and the fiction affects reality debate. So what's happening and why should people care? So the main thing that's going on that kind of originated especially from the anti versus pro-ship debate has been a consistent point of contention, one of which has been particularly used as a gotcha argument by antis, which is how can you say fiction doesn't affect reality? Just look at things like Birth of a Nation, historically racist characters, or the Turner Diaries. And doing a brief search, I found these arguments appearing as far back, at least as I could tell, from 2020 on Twitter, that they began to crop up and then be used regularly. And we can see on the top right example, May 6, 2020, got 18,000 likes of fiction doesn't affect reality is such a privileged take because there's been ages of fictional media involving racial stereotypes and other harmful ideas about minorities that impacted the audience then and still lingers in their descendants and the present media we watch now. So seeing things like this and arguments like maybe read about the Turner Diaries and you just might understand how fiction affects reality brings up multiple problems and including just like misinformation, but also like giving people the wrong facts about history. Like this person in the next few posts that says they wouldn't have made the KKK if it wasn't for Birth of a Nation. And then fiction can make it look really cool, and that's quite literally how the KKK happened. And to which, in this specific case, I was talking directly to this person and I mentioned propaganda, but then they just had to say, just because a movie contains lots of political beliefs of the creator doesn't mean it's propaganda, first of all. And so we're going to unpack that kind of thought process that too many people I've seen have with this idea. And so while antis take the phrase fiction doesn't affect reality very literally, the primary origin of the phrase was originally used when refuting claims of fiction creates crime. So where people believe that somehow media will cause people to commit heinous acts. And so we believe generally that how someone reacts to media is based on many more factors than simply the media itself existing. So for instance, if this was taken seriously, as we've brought up before many times, rock music, heavy metal, video games, and children's classic cartoons with the slapstick violence and like shotgun jokes would be either banned or heavily regulated for fear of causing violence and such things. So one of the biggest issues that this argument has caused is that it's ultimately downplaying genuinely harmful reactionary beliefs and spinning them as just fiction or almost like pretend. So we're going to establish the definitions of propaganda and fiction because the biggest thing centering this debate is how you define something. So, why is this disingenuous? So, a lot of this began to be brought up when you're discussing explorative entertainment, and they would equate explorative entertainment with deliberate manipulation. So, um, basic fandom things were being compared to heinous propaganda. So if people were usually complaining about things they deemed as problematic sexuality or sexual expression in fandom, specifically a lot of times in women's media, BL, yaoi, hentai, fan fiction, video games, these were where it was most often. Like 90% of arguments surround these ideas of just shipping and fictional characters. But then by using this propaganda is fiction argument, they're comparing these fandom topics to literal Nazi and KKK manifestos, Jim Crow racist caricatures, and blackface minstrel shows, all things that have a long history and were created with the intention of mocking and dehumanizing real people. Books and films made with the deliberate intent of targeting a specific person or group of people to make them look bad. And so, long story short, political, racial, and wartime propaganda is being put at the same level as individuals who lack specific motivation, such as political goals, making erotic fiction. You know, they're not trying to, most people aren't trying to do a rallying cry for everyone, as funny as that may sound when you're discussing erotic fiction. So, to define propaganda, we'll begin with the main definitions, and I have a couple of main sources here that I use: Propaganda and Persuasion, 6th edition, and a psychological definition of propaganda. And so, propaganda was originally a neutral term meaning to disseminate or promote. However, this neutrality was lost by around the 1600s due to the Roman Catholic Church propagating their faith to the New World, as well as being anti-Protestant. So basically, the propaganda became something that had intent and negativity attached to it. To identify a message as propaganda is to suggest something is negative and dishonest. So it's synonyms: you have lies, distortion, manipulation, brainwashing, psychological warfare, disinformation, which means deliberate instead of misinformation. And so propaganda as a means of social control relies less on helping individuals come into intelligent control of their conduct and relies more on inducing individuals to embrace irrational emotional drives, basically feelings over facts. And propaganda becomes a process of wholesale emotional conditioning without the subject's knowledge. And the four main principles of propaganda are avoiding logical arguments and appealing to emotion. So instead of having a rational back and forth, you want to heighten the senses, get people upset, get people emotionally moved to get their attention. And you fit situations into patterns of we versus the enemy, good versus evil. You reach out to social groups to change the makeup of influential communities, clubs, and so forth. And as much as possible, you hide the propagandist to make it look like people are coming to these decisions on their own. And so there's a couple of examples on the right with translated: German women, think about your children, vote Hitler. And degenerate art, a reckoning by the state council. So these are a couple of examples of what people commonly think of when you see propaganda. And so to continue definitions of different people's perspective, propaganda is the abuse of persuasion, withholding information, invoking heuristic devices, and meaningless association, mass suggestion or influence through the manipulation of symbols and the psychology of the individual. Propaganda represents the work of organizations or groups to win over the public for special interests through an orchestration of attractive conclusions packaged to conceal both their persuasive purpose and lack of sound reasoning. Attempts to move a recipient to a predetermined point of view by using simple images and slogans that truncate thought by playing on prejudices and emotions. And it is what repressive regimes use to glorify their leaders, motivate their citizens, and demonize their enemies. And a key part, I'd say one of the most key parts of propaganda, is that it depends on the receiver's willingness to accept the credibility of the source. So it depends on how willing people are to believe it and embrace it. That's the most important thing when it comes to propaganda itself. And so for fiction in general, fiction, universally understood for basic definitions, is a type of book or story that is written about imaginary characters and events not based on real people and facts. Anti-fans often use the second definition of fiction to be technical about it. So you would say a false report or statement that you pretend is true. They equate propaganda to this second idea of fiction, trying to make narrative fiction and false facts the same thing. So, for example, a lot of times you might hear when he's telling you something, you never know what's fact and what's fiction. So you never know what's real and what's made up or fake. And so many of these anti-fans treat all narrative fiction a lot of the times as allegories or fables, and thus kind of insist that all fiction must contain some hidden meaning or motivation, a moral lesson, or a moral intention. And so fiction is a literary genre that encompasses imaginative storytelling. It involves the creation of characters, settings, events, and narratives that do not exist in the real world. In fiction, authors use their creativity to write stories that are often for the purpose of entertainment and exploring themes or artistic expression. And by contrast, nonfiction refers to factual stories about real people, places, and events. Authors relay accurate, verifiable information, and these experiences and explanations are grounded in reality and used to educate, persuade, or document true events. And so the key takeaways we can get here before we move on to the specific examples that I have is that propaganda is deliberately manipulative, misrepresentative, often pushed as educational material or meant to be a reflection of the real world, for example, dehumanizing caricatures. It's a deliberate play on prejudices and fears that already exist, deliberately limited or outright false information that is given. It's intended to mobilize audiences for a specific result or change people's minds through like mass persuasion based on false information. And it deliberately is intended to foster trust in those creating the propaganda. And another very important key point here is that much of the examples, especially that we're going to discuss today, come from the people who are making the media in question are a part of that hate group, such as Nazis making media with Nazi themes and the British Empire shaping perceptions of entire races of people to their citizens, for instance. On the other end, narrative fiction is not meant to be seen as reliable or real compared to nonfiction. It's assumed to be largely or completely made up. It does not present itself as truth. It requires a voluntary suspension of belief from the reader. You understand that this is pretend. These aren't based on real people generally or a real thing that happened. It's largely created for the purpose of entertainment and explorative. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of one of the key points that we're gonna deal with when, whoops, where does my shit go? There it is. when we're dealing with this topic. And so, how racist ideas became widespread is very important to the basis of the discussion. And so, to read one excerpt from How Racist Ideas Became Widespread by Marika Sherwood, Europeans decided Africa had to be conquered and governed in order to expand the profits from the exploitation of its resources. Africans still had to be pacified, that is, violently controlled, while this exploitation took place. This required an army. These men were not needed to protect Britain from invaders, but to conquer peoples thousands of miles away. The easiest way to perpetuate the myth of African savagery, the propaganda claimed Africans needed to be civilized. In Britain until the late 1800s, the mass population knew very little about other people from, other peoples and other places of the world. Once missionaries became active, the British people learned about Africans, Australians, Native Americans from the church. So all of the narratives that they were savage or evil or there was something wrong with them came from the church, an extremely influential core aspect of their society. And so, for instance, those who could afford a ticket to the spreading popular musical theaters would have been entertained by acts imported from the US performed by black-faced minstrels. And these minstrels were white men insulting, denigrating, characterizing black men. But to go even further from that, from the late 1800s, with the introduction of free education, this notion was propagated very thoroughly, not just in children's books and comics or entertainment shows, but scientific societies. And so newspapers, science, school textbooks, and the church, all sources that are supposed to be educational, core to your society, like the center of your universe, was portraying people like this. So, for one example, the peoples of West Africa were described in a 1925, that's literally 100 years ago, school textbook as being usually the most degraded, cannibalism, and a horrible blood ritual, and their idolatrous worship being common. So, cannibalism stereotypes and all of those things. And minstrel shows began around 1828 with the creation of the character Jim Crow by a white performer, Thomas Rice. So these were things that were embedded for literal centuries into the culture, and it was taught in schools, it was pushed by the church, it was in all levels of society that this was truth and how the people there took it. And so on the left side here, I provide a couple of examples. On the left is a slide from Nazi propaganda to promote euthanasia of Black people for Hitler Youth. Again, this was seen as an educational programming for the children, saying how much money you could save if you just put them down. And then further on, like below, we have Judy Garland and Shirley Temple in blackface, in the 1930s. It was common for famous actors and stars to don blackface at some point. And this racism and these racist actions were just embedded into the fabric of society for over 100 years at this point. And so now we get into the big one, deconstructing common examples of propaganda used in the fiction affects reality argument, Birth of a Nation, the film and novel. Birth of a Nation was originally based on Thomas Dixon's 1905 novel, The Klansman. And a brief summary for many of those who do not know is it's a story of two families, one from the North, the other from the South, and the challenges they faced during the war. It's heavily slanted in favor of the Confederates, who are viewed and presented as noble and right, against the Yankees, who are presented as degenerate and without scruples. And when Black Union troops take over the town of Piedmont, South Carolina, the Ku Klux Klan becomes the white population's saviors. And so, how the film portrays Black people, they employ blackface, which, again, at that point for the film had been around for approximately 90 years. And it played on pre existing fears, such as whites were denied the right to vote in the film while Black people are shown dominating the ballot boxes. Newly appointed government Black members of the South Carolina legislature are shown putting their bare feet on desks and drinking on the job and eating fried chicken. And their Black men are shown as pushing for interracial marriage, aka the fear of access to white women. And one Black man, of course in blackface, it's a white actor, relentlessly pursues a white woman, causing her to kill herself by jumping off of a cliff just to avoid him. And so in retaliation, the Klan lynches this man in a way that is portrayed as righteous in retaliation. And so the state of society at the time when this was made was that Black people were universally seen as an inferior race, subhuman, property, entertainment, dirty, uneducated, superstitious, dangerous, especially Black men, and prone to trickery and dishonesty. And so, when we get to Jim Crow laws, which were named again after that minstrel show character, they began immediately after slavery was abolished in the United States. So this was 50 years before the film was made. Strict local and state laws detailed when, where, and how formerly enslaved people could work and for how much money. The Southern codes were a legal way to keep Black citizens in indentured servitude, take away their voting rights, and control where they lived and traveled. The laws, which existed until 1968, were meant to marginalize African Americans by denying them opportunities, and those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often faced arrests, fines, jail sentences, or even violence and death, such most commonly considered lynching. And so, Birth of a Nation itself was made by a racist group that was sympathetic to the KKK, who did not want Black people to succeed. It was played to an audience of people who generally either already believed the aforementioned negative stereotypes about Black people or who had no idea of what Black people were actually like. And so we get, again here, to a lack of education, that those in the South felt that this was their reality, and those whites outside of the South or the North, knowing nothing else and being ignorant of Black people. And I say this as, of course, there were Black people in the North and families and communities, but they stayed generally out of or away from those communities. They were still pretty separate, and they took the film at face value. So this is where we get into the importance of intent, and the author himself, who originally wrote the novel The Klansman, one of the big things that was in it was the lost cause myth. And so the book and the film follows the lost cause myth, which is an interpretation of the American Civil War viewed by most historians as a myth that attempts to preserve the honor of the South by casting the Confederate defeat in the best possible light. It attributes the loss to the overwhelming Union manpower and resources and nostalgically celebrates the supposedly benevolent slave owners and contented enslaved people, and downplays or altogether ignores that slavery was the cause of the war. It became the philosophical foundation for the racial violence and terrorism employed to reverse Reconstruction. And Reconstruction, for those who don't know, is basically what happened after slavery. And for the reimposition of white supremacy in the Jim Crow era. So its acceptance in the North as well as the South facilitated a national reunion following the war, but at the cost of the civil rights of African Americans. So the man who wrote the man who wrote The Klansman described his novel. He said, "My object is to teach the North, the young North, what it has never known, the awful suffering of the white man during the dreadful Reconstruction period. I believe that Almighty God anointed the white men of the South by their suffering during that time to demonstrate to the world that the white man must and shall be supreme." And it was also the film shown in the White House and endorsed by the president. So that's a pretty big deal. I don't know of many fan fictions and weird kinks art that have been played at the White House and then subsequently endorsed by the President of the United States. So, there's a little bit of a difference there on scale and impact. And so a lot of the romanticization happening with The Lost Cause 2 lifts up Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was previously a slave trader but became the founding member and first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan during that era. And so it's basically, white supremacy on steroids here. And so our key takeaways for this piece is that the Klansmen and Birth of a Nation were intended to spread the lost cause myth. They were rewriting and misrepresenting history to present itself as factual and reliable. They were deliberately farming sympathy from white Northerners and misrepresenting Black people to the masses. As he said, "My object is to teach the North." It was intended to mobilize their audience and spread white supremacy. Again, as the author said, "I believe Almighty God anointed the white men of the South to demonstrate to the world that white man must and shall be supreme." Deliberately played on pre-existing prejudices and fears of Black people that had been present for centuries, since at least when they were first brought through on slave trading in 1619. And so such fears like Black people taking over the government, preying on white women, mixing the races. And so the creators and fans of Birth of a Nation were not engaging with the book or film as pretend. This wasn't a sandbox. It was a reflection of how they saw the world and their irrational fears manifested into a narrative story and a call to arms. To them, Birth of a Nation represented a very real threat to their centuries-old sacred way of life and power. They were not exploring anti-Black themes in fiction they believed to be wrong in real life. They were projecting their real-life anti-Black beliefs, hatred, and aggression into this story and its portrayal and treatment of Black people. Harm was an explicit goal. And so to do our second example of deconstructing these is the Turner Diaries. So 1978 is when it was written. It was created by William Pierce, America's most influential neo-Nazi for some 3 decades until his death in 2002. And he was born in Atlanta into an old South aristocracy that included his mother. His great-grandfather was governor of Alabama and an attorney general of the Confederacy. And William Pierce himself joined the American Nazi Party in 1959 and 67. And he founded the White Nationalist Alliance in 1974 when he was 41. 4 years later, he combined his love of old science fiction pulp with his love of Nazism to create the Turner Diaries, a fictional chronicle of a successful fascist revolution set in the United States in the early 1990s. And his work inspired many existing neo-Nazis and white nationalists in the United States, including Timothy McVeigh, who orchestrated the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, which killed 168 people. So, a summary for the book is the Turner Diaries are presented as the diary of Earl Turner, written in the early 1990s. Turner is radicalized when the Jewish-controlled system passes laws outlawing firearms. He joins the Organization, a far-right terrorist group dedicated to overthrowing the system through violence. In his role as Organization man, he builds communication networks and bombs, he blows up federal buildings, and he's also involved in the liberation of California and helps to systemically murder all Jewish and non-white people in the state. The organization detonates nuclear bombs in major U.S. cities and precipitates a nuclear conflict with Russia. And Turner sacrifices himself in a suicide bombing of the Pentagon. And at the very end of the book, 100 years later, reports that the fascist revolution was successful and all non-white people on the planet have been exterminated. So that's a lot. And in William Pierce's own words, you know, the sickness of multiculturalism is destroying America, Britain, every other Aryan nation in which it's being promoted. We must have a racially clean area of the earth, blah, blah, blah. We will not be deterred by the difficulty or temporary unpleasantness, he means ethnic cleansing, involved because we realize it is absolutely necessary for our racial survival. The book, he says, is advertised as a blueprint or a handbook for white supremacy and white victory. And he took advantage of the overlap between science fiction and far-right conspiracy theories to cast white racists as the kind of virile, self-sacrificing heroes you might see in many books, movies, or comics from that era of American media. And so these are quotes from the book directly, and I don't know how anybody could see these and not understand how this is just straight up, not understand this is just straight up propaganda. You'll see some of the highlighted parts. But in an article I quoted, in Pierce's topsy-turvy world, black men are rapists and no one will defend white women for fear of being labeled as racist. Similarly, Pierce, like Hitler before him, believes that Jewish people are trying to murder all white people. This supposedly justifies murdering them in large numbers. And so when it comes to these quotes, I'm not going to read all of these out loud because they're pretty terrible, but he pulls on cannibalism narratives, young white women many times. He says white slave trade, calls these predatory groups, killing women and children indiscriminately. They took our schools away. And the very end, I found very interesting that said the queers, the fetishists, the mixed race couples, the sadists, and the exhibitionists, urged on by the mass media, are parading their perversions in public, and the public is joining them. I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. The queers and the fetishists are ruining the world. But the key takeaways from the Turner Diaries that we can have is this book was meant to be a handbook and serve as an example to his followers. It deliberately played on pre-existing prejudices and fears of all non-white, non-Christian, non-heterosexual people, and it spread white supremacy and Nazi beliefs, including various racist stereotypes and conspiracy theories that were made to radicalize people. And the creator of the diaries, again, was a literal Nazi organizational leader, and many of his followers were inspired by his work and went on to commit numerous hate crimes and murders in his name. So this is a brief section that somebody did want me to touch upon to get a little bit into copaganda to understand the differences. So I recommend reading Copaganda, How Police and the Media Manipulate Our News by Alec Karakatsinis. And there's a gulf between the image and the reality of the punishment bureaucracy. Copaganda creates that gulf. It is the system of government and news media that promotes mass incarceration, justifies the barbarities and profits that accompany it, and distorts our sense of what threatens us and what keeps us safe. So copaganda, as propaganda is in the name, narrows the concept of threat, focus on petty local crime, while ignoring flagrant corporate greed and health violations. They manufacture suspicion against the poor and immigrants and racial minorities, and convince the public more money on policing is the only solution. And so his perspective was that the volume of local crime stories is perhaps the single most important feature of contemporary news propaganda. If you aren't in the United States, I'm not sure where it is everywhere else, but a lot of the news, regardless of what city you're in, relates to like the most recent crimes that have been going on and like bad news. And so Copaganda specifically was driven by 1950s CIA funding projects, 1990s Drug Enforcement Administration funding media that portrayed the war on drugs. And so how does this vary when it comes to fictional media? So I think in modern fictional media, copaganda in a way began early with the Hays Code, where they said law must not be belittled, ridiculed, nor must a sentiment be created against it. The courts of the land shall not be presented as unjust. Law and justice must not be made to seem wrong or ridiculous. There must be no scenes showing law enforcement officers dying at the hands of criminals. But in terms of modern day fictional media, it might become propaganda when it's funded and overseen by police institution itself or the government. If it's presented as real, even though it's reality TV, and the oversaturated market with highly sanitized perspectives that ignore or deny or validates the negative reality of policing. So specific minority groups disproportionately portrayed as criminals, and which perpetuates an idea of needing the police to keep the non-minority safe or deserving of punishment and enforcement, or any negative policing is seen as a case of one bad apple. And it was made by someone who is openly biased or prejudiced in real life and projects that onto their work. And so considering all these elements are essential in how we view and categorize specific media. And so to break down the core issues here and get into the end of everything, propaganda is made by people or institutions that openly express bigotry, extremist beliefs, and a desire to do harm in real life, such as ethnic cleansing or perpetuating blatant racist stereotypes. There's a difference between an arguably flawed portrayal and an openly bigoted portrayal from actual leaders or members of hate groups who are actively dehumanizing real people and endorsing specific harmful behaviors to be committed against them in real life. So a lot of times, this is where you would see argument breakdowns occur where someone would say, well, it's just fiction or it's just a picture, but the specific purpose of that creation is to harm someone or to directly target someone, versus somebody writing about a general experience and then being accused of being a bigot when the portrayal may have just been flawed or like unclear. For instance, if I found out an erotica artist was a Nazi, I wouldn't support them because their real life beliefs and influences are what matter to me more than what art they explore. My problem with them is their view of the real world and how they treat and view the real people in it. And so, by extension, too, I would be more critical of a police show that's funded by the government or the NYPD, for example, than I would be a buddy cop narrative in a story or a BL. I wouldn't assume someone making cute officer OCs means that they endorse police brutality. This type of discussion here. And so, the lack of education, no one is immune to propaganda, but you can be diligent. So if you have a pre-existing real-life experience, that will likely outweigh how media or propaganda specifically will affect you. For example, a very pertinent one is how the Black community, especially in the United States, experiences policing compared to the white community. No matter how many good cops I personally see in media or that I even like as characters, that won't overshadow my real world experiences and knowledge of that topic. It's not going to convert me to dealing with all of that stuff and saying, oh, forget about that, everything's fine. And knowing the signs of propaganda and recruitment is vital, but the best way to avoid that recruitment is understanding history and historical contexts of how groups of people have been unfairly portrayed. So always question good versus evil talking points and verify statements from reliable sources. Don't be controlled by reactionary or fearful reactions, beliefs. Look for the facts. Give yourself a moment to calm down and look at what's really going on. take time to understand what's in front of you and what it's actually trying to say. So, for instance, a big problem that we've seen in the fiction, reality, etc. debate has been people who too hurriedly assume a work that's being critical of something is actually endorsing it. And that's really one of the biggest issues is people will argue about the intent of something when that wasn't the author's intent at all. Or you have people who are inspired by a band, like Rage Against the Machine. A lot of like white supremacists or Nazis would like that type of stuff and their music, but they were literally anti-Nazi. So you can't account for how stupid some people are sometimes, and it's not the fault of the creator for that. And so here's some recommended reading and watching that I have, some documentaries and books related to all of these topics. There's so much out there to read about and to explore and focus on that I just shared personally the things that I've seen and I've watched. And I forgot to add it, but there is a channel that I think is helpful too, that you can get into when it comes to more copaganda, and that's by the channel Skip Intro, called How Did We Get Copaganda, episode 1. So I'd also recommend that too. And so that is all for that part of the presentation. Let me see if we have any questions. Do we have any questions from the... Let's see. Let me go scrolling through the chat here. Scrolling through the chat. It's always weird when I like finish these things, but like I can't hear anyone talking. I'm like, thank you guys. Oh yes, thanks for posting the link to the Copaganda thing, that channel. Just skimming the chat. I saw the post. Creator, cops are assholes, fascists with no media literacy. This is for me, actually. Do you think there are propaganda elements that have been put through BL media? From what I've seen personally, no. But again, I feel like that's just what comes down to the creators. So like, from what I've personally experienced, areas like fan fiction or BL, like niche queer subgenres of literature, usually have people who have been victims of some type of like either misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, etc. So there's not as much reactionary content there. That's not to say that nobody could ever do that, but again, it would just be one piece, like one book. And like if a book had very blatant, like racist characters or something like that, that would be a problem for the author themselves. I hate the idea of BL propagandas. Yeah, that's one of the problems sometimes I see is like it's the problem isn't just, it's not having like a cop OC. I think lots of people like idealize or hope for a world where justice is an actual, justice is attainable, an actual thing, and people are kind and good. The problem is just when it's presented as like real life, or you have shows like Cops or To Catch a Predator, where they're like sensationalizing it. That's the word. Skimming the comments. Mm-hmm. Be gay, do crimes is a slogan. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, here's one. Okay. I missed the start of the talk, but personally I prefer a more neutral lens to propaganda, where it's anything broadly distributed that tries to modify the public's behavior and beliefs, whether positive or negative or not. Yes. That's definitely a key part of it, is that there's corporate propaganda. There are things that are made to like manipulate people to buy things. You could especially argue that when it comes to things like cigarettes or alcohol. Um, but I think when it comes to this specific discussion with, in terms of the fiction affects reality argument happening specifically in fandom, it becomes disingenuous just because all of the examples being used are very extreme and all negative. So instead of just saying like, "Oh, I would like to make something that makes people think of this in a favorable light," um, I don't think calling that type of thing propaganda isn't necessarily helpful to the specific discussion. Because yeah, like you said, technically anything could be defined as propaganda if it was just for trying to convince people of something. But when you get down to the general most common examples, like for instance, I picked like the psychology of propaganda was something that was written in like the 1930s, as well as more recent pieces from like the 2000s, and the most consistent thing was like um hiding your intentions, trying to change the public perception of something like that. Yeah, you're right, Squeak. So, like with the word pro-ship, are the antis again twisting the word of what propaganda stands for, thinking BL is going to turn women rotten or trans and not realizing that they're the ones having fed into the propaganda? Yep, that turf radfem propaganda. Trying to catch up as quick as I can, so if I'm quiet for a minute, I'm just reading so I don't ignore anything. Thank you, Cloudy. Ro asks, why do you think people apply their is this okay rules more harshly to fiction? Whoa, okay. Sometimes they fly by. Okay, why do you think people apply their is this okay rules more harshly to fiction dealing with sexual abuse than they do fiction with violent abuse, even when the essay fiction is narrated by the victim expressing their feelings, besides the feeling of, oh, it's icky? Um, I've discussed this in a few things in the past, but I think the core reason is just, especially Western culture views sexuality as inherently deviant. You know, um, the best example would be the church. Obviously, it's very influential in Western culture and civilization, but it's like violence on behalf of the church became considered, oh, righteous. Whereas sexuality, even between consenting adults, is very restricted, very specific, and um, also very taboo. You know, it's like they wouldn't even tell like women like what sex was until they were about to have it in some certain cases. So it's like, you know, even between married couple, it's like a wife and her husband. She's like, what's gonna happen? I don't know. So it's a lot of that taboo treatment and restricting of information that makes it seem scary and sinful, I think, personally. Let's see. We were just Ellen Drog says we were discussing in the chat further up what to make of media that's clearly directed to children, often pro-military cop, that's benign, end quote, but still obviously political and aimed at children to indoctrinate them into right-wing worldviews. And it said, I know you and I have discussed online safety resources in general, but anything you'd suggest on how to balance this versus parents, guardians respecting children's privacy in their reading? Oh, I mean, once again, I think the main thing is like what I see from people is just talk to your kids. People need to talk to their kids, but also just show them the signs of stuff, you know. Like once again, um it didn't matter like how many books of this or that I read. I understood how racism affected my family personally. And so there's definitely just that if you have any base logic, wait, if you have any base knowledge of at all of certain topics, that can vastly help improve how you react to something. Sorry, I was reading while I was talking and then I said the wrong words. Let's see. Okay. Do you... Whoops. Questions are evading me yet again. I saw a question. Boy Kisser. I've always liked your username. Do you think there's a similar vibe of sinfulness around BL or gay media for the same reason that people are not told about the gays and what they do? Do you mean like in the religious sense, or how? Because like, yeah, a lot of things are taboo, and therefore... Oh, this reminds me of a talking point, was that somebody also mentioned one time that one of the reasons conservatives, like people who have the idea that what you read is what you are, um reflects greatly on why they won't engage with what quote unquote progressive media. So like if you read a book about gay characters, they're like, you're gonna turn the kids gay, you're gonna make people trans. And so like they give that media so much power over them, and so thus it makes them so vehemently against it without even actually engaging with it. That's the cognitive dissonance, how they can justify never engaging with something that they've never read it, but they're like, ban it, get rid of it. Ban it, get rid of it, ban that guy, send him to hell. I think that's an important thing for people to recognize and realize, that that's really a core problem when it comes to media, quote unquote, consumption from people, and how people can be against something while refusing to engage with it. And it gives them an out to say, I don't have to look at that because it will make me evil. So unlike you, I'm going to stay pure and ban it. Yeah. Someone said, I think another part of it's like maybe they were already gay or trans and the fiction allowed them to explore that. Of course, the bigots don't want that exploration, so they make the moral panic of saying it's causation instead of exploration. Yeah, exactly. That's a big part of it. They always say, it made the kids gay, and it's like, do you look at your buddies longingly? Do you wish for them to hold your hand and kiss your forehead? No, then you you haven't chosen to be straight. Like when you wish the homies would hold your hand, they just don't have that level of like self-reflection. Let's see. Brain Culture asks, thank you so much, Sam. You are welcome. Would you be able to share this slide as a reference somewhere? Absolutely. Um, let's see, I saved the presentation download. I can post it on my Blue Sky. And if I don't do it after this, please remind me. My DMs are open anytime. Squeak says, it feels like the part of the problem is that parents are relying on everything else to raise and teach their children. So when they get even a whiff of something they don't personally like or understand, because they haven't looked into it, they lash out. It's created a generation of lashing out before understanding. The moment anything uncomfortable or fearful comes along. That's very true. I feel like it's a combination, because I remember seeing parents act like that when I was growing up, but it was because they were more religious in certain cases. But now these days, like, kids are loose online, but like not just loose like they were in the beginning, like I was. They're like being radicalized by strangers online, and like educational quote unquote media is giving them all of the wrong information. Yeah, Cloudy, queer people reading works with straight people. For some reason, I wasn't turned straight by this. What could it be? Oh yeah, I can post it in Discord. That's true. The Citrus Con. I will figure that out. Rotten Boys Club. Is that also why they won't engage with academic papers, because they're afraid they'll absorb the information? I really, I really think that's a big part of it. Um, it's just kind of like not wanting to face the fact that you could be wrong. You're more concerned about being wrong for yourself than you are about actually, knowing the correct information. Hey, Carter. Guys, the gay porn made me gay. Oh, wait, I've been gay. False alarm. Oh, Irving Benitez. Is that a book? Depiction doesn't equal endorsement. No, send that to me. I love you guys. You're so funny. Remember in Yu-Gi-Oh when Yugi set a guy on fire and then a ton of kids who read Shonen Jump set other people who cheated gambling on fire? Just kidding. If anybody has any questions that I missed, please repost them in the chat so I can answer them. Because every time people reply to one of the comments, everything kind of bumps up a little bit, and so then I lose track of where I was. Okay. Megan's house. The thing that irks me the most with aunties is when they do get called out critically, they say things like so much for anti-harassment. It's the same energy as so much for the tolerant left. I have also noticed that. Um, and yeah, somebody else added, to be fair, I have seen pro shippers get into fights when they could have blocked and moved on. But yeah, a lot of the time it's people saying, you pointing out my abusive behavior is abusing me, sad face. That I do think a lot of them are just reacting in human ways to awful experiences, but I do hate being stereotyped the same as the people who hurt them. Yeah. It's yeah, definitely it does get very much like that. Oh, Corolla, I love you too. You said I love you so much for the work you do, Sam, but honestly, how do you stay sane? I don't. That's why I quit. No, I'm just kidding. That's why I retired from Twitter. Once they got rid of the block feature, I was like, all right, guys, see you never. And I had to leave Twitter. But yeah, I've stepped away from like 90% of it, and I just manage like the little things and the things that personally interest me. So like most recently, especially with the new administration, I became very focused on compiling information about white supremacy, propaganda, and conservative organizations, and all that type of stuff. So I'm able to stay sane because I find it interesting and I'm more interested in sharing information and people and educating them on that specific thing than I am of it tiring me out. But I have absolutely am prioritizing my own mental health these days. Spider Duck. It'd be nice if we still had kid-friendly digital third spaces instead of letting them loose on social media with adults and no knowledge of internet safety. Yes, that's one of the biggest, I think that's the biggest problem, really, that's happening here, is that, I mean, even when I and myself, back in the old days in the 90s when I was young, um, there was just so many games to play. You weren't gonna really, you never got onto anything else. Why must kids talk about pro shipping? They should be on Club Penguin. Exactly. They should be playing like mini golf games and shit. It's it's done it's a lot of damage. Like people don't think of that their kid is going to be radicalized by like online shipping morality, but it's a strange and sad reality that's happening. But a lot of core problems could just be mitigated with teaching basic online safety. That's like, don't give people your personal information. Don't talk about sexual topics with random ass people. Doesn't matter what age they say they are, you know, all that type of stuff. Just don't do it. And it's like that would end so many problems. Doesn't matter if you're pro ship, anti space, whatever. It would just keep everybody safe, which is what I want and why it's so damaging when you split people up like that, because it's like a predator could be anywhere, anytime. It's they're not designated to just specific areas. Let's see. I hope there are more events like this where people can come together and enjoy BL and LGBT art and fix without judgment. Yes. I know that Fujo Coded is working on teaching people how to make their own communities through coding and other such things. And people like Citrus Con, Lovely Peachy, um, are all making more communities on Discord, etc. Like good places for people to hang out. And then there's also things like the Queer and Feminist Perspectives panel that has been occurring since at least last year. It's a great place for fandom scholars to cross and meet in the middle and present their ideas. So if any of you have any LGBTQ or feminist related discussions related to fandom you'd like to go through, definitely check them out. Let's see. Is there a particular anti-movement against gay men being depicted, as I haven't seen it push so much towards lesbian-oriented media? And like with antis and anti-fans? I feel like it depends, because a lot of times I know myself and others have experienced that how you depict lesbian relationships could be extremely policed in fandom. And when it comes to everyday media, I think for a while, at least like in children's media, they're more common. I guess maybe because they're seen as less threatening, or like less loaded in the type of topic as compared to gay men. Um, but I know when it comes to fandom, I know antis generally dislike anything that could be considered a quote stereotype, such as like effeminate or flamboyant gay men, and then that just ends up gay bashing gay men who are like that, like real people. Let's see. Corolla, don't worry, I won't quit. I won't quit. All this is too important to me. That's why I have my website. That's why I can put everything I care about, and it just keeps getting bigger. Like I have a whole section on online safety resources. Thank you, Ellen Drog. LMAO, Sam, who can blame you for bailing at that point? No, yeah. Blue Sky is way better, Jay. Thank you, Bonnie K. I'm late because of slow damage, but nice to have you back, Sam. Thank you. This will be replayed. It will be rebroadcast. I think it will be rebroadcast in the middle of the night. So around maybe 10 hours from now. Central time, I think it's 1:30 in the morning, my time. So you can watch it from the beginning there. Oh, and Claire says it's unfortunate because there's so many people on Twitter who can benefit from your work. All of you are allowed to screenshot and reshare my posts on Twitter or wherever. I only locked my Twitter because I didn't want the people who were crazy obsessed and weird about things in fandom to stalk my posts and do that kind of stuff where they screenshot a thing and talk about you. Mainly, yes, because of the blocking feature that was removed. So I was just to avoid that nonsense. I locked my account, but you can please share all my stuff. Please share my links. Please share my screenshots. I welcome it. I love it. I want people to do that. So yeah. Somebody asked, as an antidote to despair, do we have any concrete actions for people who care about these issues? Reading is important, but slightly more action-like. Post your crazy art and amp up other people's would be one guest. Volunteer for CitrusCon next year? Yes, please do volunteer. And you ask anything else? I guess when it comes to concrete actions, yes, post your crazy art. Make it clear that you have supportive spaces for people to come just comfortably hang out. But another big one, and this could depend on how many spoons you have for some people, but whenever I've read anything about radicalization, every single time anybody who ever got out of anything, whether it was a cult or especially hate groups, was people in like the everyday normal life just being kind to them. People going against what they were told the world is, you know. And of course, I'm not telling people to just let people walk over you or treat you like shit. Absolutely not. But for anyone who has the time or the energy and like a person who seems more sincere, or like lost, is just being there for them, just be there for them, be available, just be a source of consistency and contentment. Because everything I heard about people who had joined hate groups was because they were lacking something in their own lives. And this gave them a purpose, it gave them community. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. So when you're able to, practice kindness. When everybody's saying all these people hate you, you know, they they want you gone, they ramp into the hate rhetoric to prove to their membership that what they're saying, they're trying to make what they're saying true from their perspective. Also, once again, you can repost your questions if I miss them. I'm going to skim for a minute to make sure that I'm not missing any right now. Yes, go eat, boy kisser. Let's see. Kids need to be banned from commenting on YouTube is all I'm saying. That's understandable. Yes, Jay, I remember DeviantArt. I was on it for like 10 years. Let's see. G, queer cat boy. Questions. Kids aside, how we start to address this, combat it with people who are in their 20s and 30s. I feel like I kind of just answered that a little bit. But once again, it's just the best thing. Like, one of the reasons I say I made my website is so people can just take the resources there, just copy paste them. Just, it's like I want to do all the work for everyone so people aren't overwhelmed. It's like, here's the sources, here's the quotes, here's the evidence. Just throw it at you and leave, You throw it at them and you leave, so you don't have to invest so much energy and time into people. And the people who are willing to listen will listen, and those are the ones who really matter. But I have had people come to me like later on, months or even years later, who said that my resources helped them get out of their negative way of thinking. Just by reading, facts, articles. And so, there's always hope. And so I think the more people that speak up about things like that, that's what really makes a difference. Yeah, Francesca's right. I think fandom hanging out in spaces where moderators can shut down fools helps, but you need a decent moderator. Absolutely. That's one of the things that was good about forums. Ellen Drog, did you already, or would you consider posting that thread of safety resources to Blue Sky? I believe I did. I can skim my stuff and repost it. And once again, everyone, feel free, please, to DM me on Blue Sky if you would like me to share any resource or repost something, and I will get that to you. Let's see. I can't read your username out loud. I'll call you PF. Kids on more adult populated sites also benefit advertisers and governments who push for censorship under the guise of child safety. Absolutely. Because there's little incentive for big tech to bring back kids' spaces online. I agree. Room surprise. On top of all this, the realization that one could adopt social justice language and use it to bludgeon other fans to death to make yourself look good was really damaging. If you spin your abuse as morally correct, I'm assuming you mean, yeah, abuse of others, as morally correct, and you can do anything you want and nobody can tell you you're bad, and you can spin what the person you don't like is doing as being somehow morally wrong, then everyone is obligated to hate them. Yep, that's what's happening. Spider Doug asks, this will be on YouTube later, right? Correct. I'm not in charge of uploading anything, so it could be next week or it could be like a month from now. It depends on the schedule for CitrusCon and who's uploading the videos. Yes, Dark, Dash. Make your own 90s style website, please. I would like to visit it. Oh, AM says, thank you for that. I've been looking for other fandom scholars with queer and feminist perspectives and wrote a thesis on moral absolutism in fandom. That sounds cool. Yes. If you're looking for any groups, just hit me up. I know a few on Discord as well. Some fandom academic groups. Sarah said, thank you for the panel, Sam. I often see a lot of people who play both sides or say they're against censorship, but also say no pro-ship. It's frustrating to see antis twist the word around where those who would have otherwise be pro-ship engage with anti or their talking points. Yeah, that was one of the biggest problems, was just taking back control of language. Somebody asked, has there been any research on recovered antis? On that specifically, not that I'm aware. Somebody could be working on it. I think somebody mentioned being interested in working on it to me like a couple of years ago. But I think it would definitely be a viable thing to look into. But there are a ton of people who basically, after either dealing with the issues, you know, like if they spoke to a therapist or like their life improved and they actually started reading resources, they would leave that thought process behind. And there's a lot of people who did that. I think people underestimate how many have done that. So Squeak is right. This is sunshine and rainbow statement, but I think focusing more on uplifting others rather than trying to hate on stuff is something folks need to do more. Yes. That's definitely the age of social media is an enragement farm, and that's one of the biggest problems that we have on the modern internet today, I think, is people used to just go online to relax and look for stuff that they liked or that they were curious about, you know, get lost in the sauce, and just kind of meander around like you were wandering about in the woods. But these days it's all about putting things that make people angry in front of them. No new best friends. That I see a lot of art students being antis. Do you have explanations when it comes to that? I'm guessing that's probably just comes from people who are into the arts regardless will probably be more involved with fandom. And so then getting into the same, you know, social boat will probably, you know, that'll probably happen more in those groups. Plus it centers around the creation of media. So if you're going to an art school and making things, I think it's especially more apparent when it comes to like animation department stuff and like illustration. I don't usually see somebody who's like an anti-shipper and is like in graphic design or doing like a bachelor's in advertising, you know. Is that they're focused on the narrative and character aspects of it and making palatable media. Lawn Flamingo, I see your site getting linked all over. It's definitely being used and spread. Excellent. Keep doing that. Do it. Thank you, Queer Cat Boy. T-shirt cannon them with information and walk away. Yes, it's not your job to teach everyone, especially bad faith actors, but at least people who are curious can check it out. Rotten Boys Club. Ah, thank you. It's really cool to see what you intended to be a single paper evolve into such a massive project. Yeah, it's like a little baby. And so I try to keep everything with it like up to date and everything, even if I'm not posting about every day like I used to. I'm really happy. And it makes me happy that it helps so many people. Let's see. Yes, Shalvia, it's really important that we support the creators of the novels, webtoons, and fics we read. Sharing, buying digital, physical goods, supporting Kickstarters. Yes, the biggest thing you can do right now is let creators that you appreciate know they're appreciated. Anytime you can, leave comments, share their work. But people especially love comments, even if you're just like, oh, that's beautiful. Like, that means the fucking world, man. You're welcome, Chaotic. Thank you for coming. And also, we got about 5 minutes left, everyone. So if there's anything pressing that you want to cover, please bring it up. Once again, if I missed it, just repost it at the bottom. But the threads, every time someone comments, the threads reset. So sometimes I can't tell if somebody wants me to talk about that or if they just left a comment for comment's sake. Let's see. You're welcome, Squeak. Thank you. Oh, Cloudy, don't worry about overthinking about what you post. Like, I follow a bunch of Japanese BL artists on Blue Sky, and like, I'm not gonna try to use a translator to say something. I just leave emojis and like exclamation points, and they like my little thing, And I was like, it makes them happy. Or I just say pretty with like an emoji, and they're like, thank you, something. So don't worry about overthinking it. You're welcome. Thanks everybody for showing up. I'm glad you'll check out the replay. And yeah, when it comes to this topic, I don't remember if I said it in the beginning or not, but I'm not pursuing a paper related to this or anything. This is it was mainly to just kind of get some facts straight, put all this information in one place, and also give people the tools to have the discussion after thinking about it for a long time, because it's one of the biggest points of contention in the fiction affects reality debate, that makes it continue. It's one of those things where it's like, well, at the end of the day, Birth of a Nation or the Turner Diaries, racist caricatures, that's all fiction, because somebody made it up, whatever. So please use this information however you can. And when the YouTube video comes out, just link it to anybody who says that stuff. Go ahead and do it, please. Oh, thank you, PF. Thank you, Piss F. You said this was my first introduction to your work, and it's so exciting to see such thorough research and resources in this area. Thank you. I was excited to do this talk because it's it's a big deal topic. You're welcome, everybody. I'm very happy you all enjoyed it. I think we had the highest we had was at least 150 people in here. Thank you, Em. You're welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming, and I always love to see all you guys. I hope that these things can serve you well. The recording will be is it in the same? Somebody asked where they can rewatch the recording. If you look at let's see. If you look at the CitrusCon schedule, it shows up again. It could be in the same channel. I don't know. Or I think it's in it's in the Slick and Slide channel. On the CitrusCon timetable. I have like 1 second more in here to link people before the timer runs out. I can't see the timer anymore, so it could cut off at any second. I lost the timer. Bye, guys. Yes. Love you guys. Hit me up on Blue Sky. No problem. Bye-bye.